In home studio applications where your singer is recording in the same room as your studio rig, your singer can typically just plug their headphones right into an available headphone jack on your audio interface. With most interfaces, this ends up just being a copy of the main stereo output on the interface, which is identical to the signal going to your speakers. However, in studio applications where the singer will be tracking in a room or in an ISO booth, and your recording rig will be in an isolated control room, this isn't the case. Typically, most studios will use a headphone monitoring system. Not only does this allow you to send your headphone cues out to the recording room, it also offers a few advantages. One, you can create multiple different headphone cue mixes for each musician. This is helpful if you have multiple musicians tracking at the same time, but typically with vocals, there's just one singer tracking at a time. Two, you can customize the cue mix so that your musician can have a different mix than what you're hearing. So for example, if your singer wants to hear more of themselves singing and less of the drums and less bass than your mix, you can set this up pretty easily without altering your mix. And three, some headphone monitoring systems allow the musician to control their headphone mix from a personal satellite mixer that plugs into the main headphone system. So I'll show you two different ways to set up headphone cue mixes in Logic. So the first is when your singer is getting a stereo feed from the headphone system, and the system doesn't allow you to control individual instruments in the mix. So you have to create the mix for the musician in Logic. This is typical when using a headphone amplifier hooked up to your audio interface. So the signal flow would look something like this. Line out 1 and 2 would be going to the main speakers in the control room, and then line output 3 and 4 would be connected to the headphone amplifier. Then the singer or other musicians would connect their headphones to the headphone amp. In Logic, you need to create a send off of each of the tracks going to line output 3 and 4. So this is where the headphone amp is connected. In Logic 10.4, they added the ability to send to a physical output. So I can just go to stereo here and then choose output 3 and 4 for all of these channels. Then I'll option click on the send amount to set it to unity. Now, all of my drum instruments are already going to their own submix on bus 1. So here's the drum mix for that on an aux track. So instead of making each of these individual tracks go to output 3 and 4, I'll just make the drum mix as a whole go to output 3 and 4. The same thing applies if you're using summing stacks. You can create different summing stacks and then send those to the headphone mix rather than the individual instruments themselves. I've also got this reverb channel here, so I'll send this over to output 3 and 4 as well. Now you'll notice that it loads these up by default as post-fader sends. So they come after the fader, but they're still before the pan. It's pretty common to make headphone mixes mono, so that's why these are pre-pan. But because they're post-fader, the mix I'll have here will still affect the headphone mix. So if I want to create a completely custom mix for my singer, I want to make all of these sends pre-fader. So now I can adjust each of the send amounts to customize the mix for my singer. However, there's this sends on faders option up here that makes this super easy. So just turn this on and then select the send that you want to adjust, so output 3 and 4. And then the send amounts show up as these yellow faders down here. So I can use these to create a custom mix for my singer. So I'll pull the guitars down a bit. I'll keep the vocals up pretty high. I'll pull the bass down a bit. And I'll pull the pianos and keys down a bit. I'll make the drum mix and the verb track pre-fader as well, and pull those down quite a bit as well. And then when you're done creating your headphone mix, you can just click here again to go back to your main mix. So this is the mix I'm hearing on output 1 and 2 in the control room through the speakers. And my singer is hearing this mix on output 3 and 4 in her headphones. If she asks me to pull up the bass a bit, all I have to do is show sends on faders again, adjust the bass a bit, and then go back to my main mix. Now, I typically avoid using a metronome or click track for singers. There's usually enough of the song already recorded, or there's a demo track to keep the singer in time. But if they really want a metronome, you can set this up in the headphone mix as well. Click All up here in the mixer, and this will show some additional hidden tracks, including Logic's hidden click track. I'll send this over to output 3 and 4 as well, and then I'll make it pre-fader. The great thing about making your click track pre-fader is you can actually pull down the click track in your mix so that you don't hear it at all or just hear a little bit of it, but then you can pull it up in the musician's mix so they hear more of it. So that's the typical way to set up a headphone Q mix for a stereo headphone amp. But at our studio, we have a headphone monitoring system which gives me the ability to send tracks out to 8 different mono outputs or 4 different stereo pairs. So this lets me break up the mix a bit, and the singer can adjust their own mix on a personal satellite mixer. So if I use my stereo output, so line output 1 and 2 on my interface, this is just a copy of the main output. And also the talkback mic automatically routes to 1 and 2. So I don't usually use my stereo output for my headphone mix. But I can break up the mix over outputs 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7, 8 as 3 stereo pairs, or outputs 3 through 8 as mono channels. So instead of having everything go to 3 and 4, I'll have the vocals go to mono output 3, and then I'll have the guitars go to mono output 4. The bass will go to 5, and the pianos and keys will go to output 6. I'll make the reverb channel share a mono channel with the guitars, so I'll send these to output 4. And then I'll make all of the drums go to 7 and 8, since they're already summed together on a stereo aux track. Then I'll make sure that all of the sends are pre-fader, and I'll option click on the send amount to set them to unity. Keep in mind that the singer is going to adjust these to her own liking, so you usually don't have to fool around with the levels in Logic too much if you're doing it this way. Now I should mention that in our studio, the line outputs 1 through 8 from the interface are normaled to inputs 1 through 8 on the headphone system. If you don't know what a normal or normaling is on a patch bay, it means that the top row paths can be automatically routed to the bottom row paths on the patch bay, so you don't have to connect a patch cable to connect them. So in our studio, we did this for outputs 1 through 8 so that we never have to patch in our headphone Q mixes. We just route them from Logic and they automatically go to the headphone system. However, if you plug in a patch cable to one of the outputs, this severs the normaled connection and you can use it for something else, like mixing with some hardware, for example. Because of this, I do have the option of using 1 and 2 on my headphone system just by sending a channel out to, say, output 9 and 10, and then I can just patch 9 and 10 over to inputs 1 and 2 on the headphone system. One last thing to keep in mind is that some monitoring systems use consumer line level audio over the Ethernet cable rather than pro line level. So if this is the case, you may hear some distortion in the headphone mix if the sends are up at unity. If that's the case, just pull all of your headphone sends down between somewhere around -10 to -6 dB to compensate for this. In the next video, I'll start recording with my singer, and the headphone setup will actually be a lot simpler because I'll just be working with a stereo demo track rather than a full mix. So I can have the vocals on 3 and 4 and the stereo demo on 5 and 6. So the singer just has to control the balance of all the music versus her vocals.